Welcome back to the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast. And I am so thrilled today to be able to introduce two people to you who really are making things tick with respect to FSR in general, and then particularly when it comes to a new development with FMLA. And first of all, I want to just say that this is part two of a two-part episode. In episode one, we looked at how the Ignore No More campaign led the U.S. Department of Labor's clarification that the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, can be used for clinical trial participation. We talked about why that is such a significant win when it comes to patients and also their family members, because that can be difficult as well. So we want to build on that conversation. We want to look at what this clarification means in practice and also how it has the potential to impact millions of patients all across the country. We're going to dig into the challenges that patients face in the workplace. We're going to look at how the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research and their coalition to transform clinical trial engagement together are working to break down those barriers with some innovative solutions, including the Champions for Change PTO, Paid Time Off Initiative, which expands employer support by providing paid time off for clinical trial participation. So that's a long way of saying that joining me today are Tricia Shivas, our Chief of Staff and Strategy at the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, and Dr. Ennis James. Welcome back, Dr. James, from the Medical University of South Carolina, where you're a member of FSR's Medical and Scientific Advisory Board, a clinical advisory member for the Ignore No More initiative, and a member of the Coalition to Transform Clinical Trial Engagement. So a lot going on there. So Dr. James, why don't you give us a quick snapshot of your role in this work?
Absolutely, and good to be back, John. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this project. So, I am a clinician and researcher at Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston. We have one of the largest sarcoidosis clinics in the country, and largely in part thanks to a very generous patient and donor, Susan Pearlstein, who donated a lot of money to help establish a center here. And as a result of that, we've really been able to make a lot of progress for sarcoid patients and specifically try to do everything we can to increase access to clinical trials and research in the space.
And thank you, Dr. James. It's so great to see you and to be on this podcast with you. And thank you so much for your extensive work all across the last few years on this effort. It's been really incredible. So I am Tricia Shivas. I'm the Chief of Staff and Strategy at the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And in my work, what is most relevant in terms of the work that I am doing for this particular project, I have been able to work alongside the incredible patient advisory leadership committee that we have through the Ignore No More efforts and the clinician advisory leadership committee, along with a number of team and staff members to help drive these efforts forward, as well as working with our research team every single day and our scientific advisory board to make sure that we are making clinical trials available to all that are impacted by sarcoidosis.
Dr. James, as a researcher, what are the biggest challenges that you face if you're trying to enroll a patient or keep a patient retained?
Um, there's a lot more challenges to that than most people realize that don't have experience in clinical research. And unfortunately, a lot of that the burden falls on the patients themselves. So one big piece is time commitment. So a lot of the recent trials that we've done in sarcoidosis require visits for treatment every 4 weeks. And so, these patients often aren't local to us. And so they're having to travel from hours away and pay travel costs. Sometimes, they may have a study visit that lasts most of the day and they may need to stay overnight. Um, so there is a big financial impact, not only from that, but also obviously, you can't actually do your job if you're down here in a clinical trial. And so, for a lot of patients, that can be a big barrier, just not being able to take time off or the financial resources or they've got multiple kids and they're having to juggle daycare and their jobs. So unfortunately, there are a good number of barriers to not only enrollment but also recruitment.
Yeah, it's difficult to just kind of pick up and leave, even if it's only once every 4 weeks, and take care of all those things that are happening in your regular life and just put that on pause for a day, even if you're willing to do it. You gotta get other people to play along. And Tricia, I know that we got a lot of information from the Sarc community with the survey. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, but let's just review. What are you hearing from patients? What are those barriers to participate in? And then do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Dr. James really put his finger on a number of those pieces that have been really critical for the patients. But, clinical trials are challenging also because people's jobs don't necessarily understand clinical trials. And many patients are also, challenged in terms of wanting to disclose or not disclose their disease. And so these present a lot of challenges that have been identified. And so, in terms of job security, a lot of our patients have identified that they are really concerned about being able to ask for time to participate in clinical trials. In fact, we had a woman when we did the focus groups way back when we first did the survey who had said that she had talked to her HR about participating in a clinical trial. And when she had discussed it with them, they said, well, if the trial fails, then you just wasted the company's time. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done at the corporate level to help people understand. And in that, it is really important for us to understand the hours and the commitment that needs to be made and think about the security we need to put in place for the patients in terms of those needs.
Got to make it easy for them to say yes.
Yeah,
Just take down as many barriers as you possibly can. And
absolutely.
we're gonna get to some of that here in just a minute, I think. But Tricia, if you would, for listeners who may not be familiar with this, what is the Family and Medical Leave Act? And now there's a 2024 clarification. What does that mean for clinical trial participants?
Yeah, so building off of what I was just describing and discussing, the Family Medical Leave Act was put in place to make it possible for people to take care of their health or to take care of a loved one who needs support for their health and not have a risk to their job or to their insurance, to make sure that there is no loss of promotion abilities, really making sure that people are secure in those factors. And so the Family Medical Leave Act is put in place to ensure that for individuals. But why we sought a clarification back in 2023 and received it in 2024 was because there is no language specifically around clinical trials. And in fact, there's some areas that leave some real ambiguity in terms of clinical trials. So the way the language is written, it discusses therapeutic benefit. And for those of you that know, when we're talking about clinical trials, that's a question mark. That's the point of the trial is to understand what the therapeutic benefit might be of that trial. And so that was a loophole that was being utilized by some HR individuals to make it so that people weren't able to utilize their family medical leave in order to be able to take that time off. And so we sought clarity around that. And we're so honored by the way that the Department of Labor thought really was very thoughtful in this, thought very long and hard about what the response would be. And this was after a lot of advocacy on FSR's end, and then through the coalition, we had over 40 Hill visits to have discussions around this and to really emphasize what the challenge was here. And then in November of 2024, we did receive that clarification from the Department of Labor. And that clarification says that essentially therapeutic benefit does extend to clinical trials. And that does extend to placebos, it extends to experimental therapies. So they are defining it very broadly. And this now protects anyone in America with any chronic disease who wants to take time off for clinical trials. They are secure in their job because of that clarification. And it also extended it even further to extend it to family member caregivers who are supporting those that are participating in clinical trials.
Yeah, I think we buried the lead because you just hit the big point, right? It's that clarification is going to make a huge difference in people's ability to participate in clinical trials. And it took you how many visits to the Hill to get that done? 40?
Yeah, 40 visits to the Hill.
Capitol, as in Capitol Hill.
Capitol Hill, right? Meeting with legislators and senators and representatives and getting champions to support us each step of the way so that we could get that clarity from the Department of Labor and be able to move this forward.
And so let's talk about why that's such a big deal for both patients and for clinicians.
Yeah, so this is such an important an important success for everyone who is living with a chronic illness. And the reason for that is if you want to take time off for a clinical trial, there's a lot of lack of clarity from your jobs a lot of the times. And what does that even mean, right? Clinical trials are often generally associated with stage 4 cancer. They're not something that people think of as people that are in the workforce necessarily participating in. There's a lot of education that we need to do more broadly around the country on the power of clinical trials, but it helps us now drive science forward for everyone. And the people that are participating in these clinical trials are making it possible for us to find better therapies. And so by protecting their time off, it makes it possible for them to make choices to be sure that they can have that time. Dr. James talked about sometimes it's 4 or 5 hours that you're dedicating to, being available to this and not feel like they're going to lose their job. And in sarcoidosis in particular, not feel like they're going to lose their health insurance. A lot of people are in these jobs for the protection of their health insurance. And for doctors, this is really important to understand so that you can extend the opportunity of clinical trials. And especially for many underserved patients, this is an opportunity for them to get even more specialized care and attention from the researchers. So, being able to extend this opportunity to those that may not otherwise have this is something that really is now protected by this opportunity.
Yeah. So, in other words, in layman's terms, you can now go and participate in a clinical trial without the fear of losing your job, right? I mean, at the end of the day,
Absolutely.
and if you've got sarcoidosis and you lose your job, you lose your health benefits, then you are out of luck.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. And so
right.
a lot of people would decide not to, right? And the choice there is I'm not going to participate in a clinical trial. It's going to be too difficult, too cumbersome, and I am not putting my job at risk.
And so, Dr. James, I guess if you, as a clinician, are trying to talk somebody into participating in something that could give us all valuable research, as well as potentially help the patient, you've got to get people to say yes, and then you got to get them to stay on till the trial's over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, in rare disease and specifically in sarcoidosis, for perspective for the listeners who aren't aware, we have not had an FDA approved medication in over 70 years, which is a little bit embarrassing to say as one of the people in the field who's trying to develop these new medications and treatment options. But, for the patients, when there aren't a lot of FDA approved options, these clinical trials may be the only chance they have to access these novel treatment options. And, Trisha talked a lot about, the recruitment piece, but retention is just as important. So when we design these clinical trials, the number of patients we need to enroll is predetermined based on how likely it is we think this treatment option is going to work and how much of a signal statistically we need to see. And so we may enroll the perfect number of patients to achieve that outcome, but then if 20% of them have to drop out because they're at risk of losing their job or they can't keep up with the time commitment, it can totally derail a study. And, not only is that millions and millions of dollars invested by a pharmaceutical company, but it's also a new treatment option that now, we're not going to have an answer for that could have potentially worked if we could have kept patients in these trials.
Yeah, so obviously that makes a huge difference. You get them to sign up. I mean, if you lose 20%, what if you lose all your placebo or all of the people who are, taking the actual medication that's being tested? So how much do you think it'll make a difference for patients knowing they have this job protection to getting them to say yes and getting them to stay in?
Um, I think it's going to make a huge difference, to be honest with you. So, and I'll say two things in response to that. So one is a general rule when we're approaching patients about potentially being in a clinical trial. Obviously, it's always a personal decision as to whether or not you want to be in a trial. And I feel like our role as the clinicians and researchers is to give them information about the trial, talk about potential side effects, what's going to be expected of them and expected of us. But then also talk about what opportunities there are to help enable them to be in the trial. And so having this is actually huge. And specifically, I had a patient who had enrolled in a sarcoidosis trial, and the trial was going well. But then about 3 or 4 months into it, her employer started to really give a lot of pushback on the amount of time that was required for the trial. She was not from the area and had to do a lot of travel, and so obviously for the patient it was very disconcerting because things were actually going well for her in the study, and now she was going to have to potentially quit. But fortunately, I think it was about 5 months or so after we had gotten that clarification letter from FMLA, which I told her about. She talked to her employer. They sent the forms to me. We filled it out, and she got covered, and she was able to complete the trial, which would not have happened had we not been able to file that paperwork, thanks to the clarification.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking of the HR offices that I've dealt with over the years, and they can be some difficult people. So that's a big win.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
No,
not to
it
throw
was
HR under the bus, but
right.
they're just doing their job. But when they have that rule to fall back on, I guess that makes a big difference. So when you think about patients' experience and maybe how it could have gone without that FMLA clarification, what now do you think about the role that workplace policies will play in advancing medical research? And do you think we'll start to see more patients enroll and then stay in the trials? Do you think it'll actually work?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Because, historically, being involved in a clinical trial as a participant, has not been looked at something that should really be viewed as this person is a champion. They're taking a risk to learn about a new medication that hopefully they'll benefit from. But really, the altruistic part of this is they're really, taking the time and effort to hopefully develop a new treatment option that, if it goes through FDA approval, future patients will have access to. And so removing FMLA and job protection is a barrier to enable those champions to be able to be in these clinical trials, and really give of themselves to the space is absolutely enormous. And it really is probably the biggest advancement in enabling participants to participate in clinical trials, that I've heard of in the last 10 to 20 years.
All right, so Tricia, I want to pivot just a little bit because all right, now we've given employees the chance to go and participate without fear of losing their jobs. But nowhere does it say their employer has to pay them for those days. So they're either going to take a sick day, they're going to take a vacation day, and more companies are just going into this paid time off database where it all kind of comes under one funnel, as it were. So I know that FSR is working, and there's something called Champions for Change, the PTO initiative. What is that? How does it work? And how does this sort of dovetail with everything that we're looking at with everything we talked about so far?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've been working, as we said, we formed a coalition with incredible members, including industry partners, corporations, leading clinicians, patients, and also we have a number of people that are joining us from a lot of different thought groups as nonprofits or medical societies. And so what we're trying to do collectively together is answer stepwise, how do we systemically address some of these challenges? And so the first was the FMLA, but then we started to think about that ourselves, right? In terms of this isn't going to address the payment challenge that people have. So what's the next thing that we need to do? So way back when we were presenting our initial work at the congressional briefing, we did propose to Congress at that time a $5,000 tax credit for those that are participating in clinical trials. And that's something that we hope to be able to continue to pursue as we continue on this path. So that's an area where we're keeping our eye on when is the right opportunity and when would be the right way to be able to propose that, to be able to have some supplemental income that's available for people in that. But right now, what we've done is launch a program called the Champions for Change PTO Initiative. And what this is an invitation to corporate America to join us in seeing that clinical trials is important for everyone. And whether someone is participating in a clinical trial for sarcoidosis or they're participating in a clinical trial for cancer or heart disease, what they are doing is advancing our understanding of science, and that is of value to everyone. And if you want to keep your employees healthy, what you need to do is acknowledge that this is a valuable thing that we need to contribute to. And through the Champions for Change initiative, what we're asking companies to do is join us by giving 1 day off of paid leave, at least 1 day, and some are giving more, at least 1 day off of paid leave to individuals who are participating in clinical trials. And this does a number of things. First, it does help to start to address the financial challenges. It extends more hours for people to take that time off to participate in a trial and have that as paid time. But it also changes the landscape of the conversations. The conversations are now taking place not only in the doctor's office with Dr. James presenting that as an option for their patients, but clinical trials are coming up now with your HR during your onboarding, during your orientation, as an opportunity for something that you can consider that might be beneficial to you. And this then puts that conversation in front of people. So many people wouldn't even know to ask for the family medical leave if it wasn't part of their conversations that they're having with their HR early. By having these conversations and having this built in, this makes it possible for these conversations to move forward. And a healthy workforce is what we need. A healthy workforce is a successful workforce, right? So this is a way of contributing to that idea. In addition to that, the coalition has been working on a number of different avenues to think about how we can balance some of the other financial burdens that were identified by our patients in the community and by Dr. James earlier. So taking that time off for making sure that you have funding to support kid care, or making sure you have time to support transportation or lodging, or whatever it is that you need to do in order to support you from a financial standpoint. This has always been a little bit tricky. As a trained bioethicist, I'll tell you that this is one of the areas that we kind of went down many years ago to protect vulnerable populations. And by we, I mean bioethicists, had gone down many years ago to protect vulnerable populations, but maybe overcorrected a little bit
Hmm.
in the ways that we created the systems to deal with that. And what I mean is there has been regulations and guidelines that have been put in place, which now make it so that when people are considering providing support from a financial standpoint, and this is whether this is an academic study or whether this is a industry sponsored study, that gets extra scrutiny. And sometimes it's considered to provide something called undue influence, which means that for more vulnerable populations, they're more likely to enroll in the trial because there's a financial incentive for them to be a part of the trial, and it becomes an additional source of income. But really, that's not truly understanding what's happening in the space, and it's not another source of income. What it is doing is putting up barriers so that those that would need additional resources in order to participate in a trial, that don't have a deep community, that don't have the financial resources to hire their own childcare or pay for their own lodging, it's excluding them from the trials. And so we are also working to really explore how we might be able to make some changes in those ethical guidelines And we are working alongside the coalition in thinking about what that would look like and how it could be impactful for the community. So we want to invite anyone that wants to join us, either as someone who wants to participate in the Champions for Change and give their employees one paid day off. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. You can use your volunteer time. You can put it into a floating holiday. There's lots of options, but making sure that you're calling that out for your employees. And we'd like to invite any organizations that would be interested in working on improving the compensation for clinical trial participants to join the coalition with us.
Now, I know that we've had a few already join. Do you want to mention? I know one of our pharmaceutical partners has agreed to step up and do that. Anybody else you want to mention? You want to mention that, and then
I
anybody else?
do want to mention that. Thank you for noting. Yeah, so
Sure.
I do want to mention that, Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals was the very first partner to join up onto this Champions for Change. And now we've been joined by many others, Mural Health, Sabai Global, the American Thoracic Society, Recursion Pharmaceuticals, Diverse Research Now, Eli Lilly and Company, and Bio News. And it's just continuing to grow. We're in conversations every single day about other groups that want to join this effort, that want to make it possible for their employees to have that extra time off to be able to take care of their health in this way.
It's interesting. So FSR has kind of led this charge, which let's pat ourselves on the back. And you in particular, Tricia, I know you've been very deeply involved in this, but this would include clinical trials for anything, right? For any illness, not just sarcoidosis. So if people are listening right now, their ears might be perking up. Well, maybe somebody's got cancer or, something more
Yeah.
common than sarcoidosis. This applies to them too.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to say that this is truly a model of a collective effort. This started with the Black patient community sharing with us specifically what those barriers were. And, honestly, job loss wasn't one of the ones that was at the top of the list for most of us. We weren't really thinking about that. And if the Black community had not identified that, we wouldn't have been having this conversation right now. So I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the patients that gave of their time to participate in that survey and the patients that gave of their insights on the focus groups, and the patients that have been part of our advisory committees every step of the way in guiding this, as well as our other partners on the coalition and our clinical leaders in this. And right, this is a win for all chronic diseases. It's not just about sarcoidosis. And so it's really important for people who are listening to this. We have a web page that has the information on the family medical leave, that has information on our Champions for Change. And John, I know you'll put those in the run of show notes for
I will.
everyone. And if we can, get the word out. Get the word out to your own HR, bring it to your own HR. There's lots of things that everyone can do to raise awareness so that should you ever need this or should you ever want to be part of a clinical trial as a healthy participant, this is an opportunity for you to do so.
That's amazing. So, what do each of you want to take away from this? Dr. James, I'll start with you.
Um, so certainly the importance of clinical trials and how much we need quality clinical trials and willing participants who are able to be in the study and obviously stay in the study. And honestly, there is a lot of positive momentum in the rare disease space and specifically in sarcoidosis. And really, in my opinion, I think now is certainly the time to get involved. And that doesn't necessarily mean, as a participant in a clinical trial, but even just supporting patients, increasing awareness, getting the word out, like Tricia said. I can tell you, I've had a lot of conversations with my colleagues and who are clinical researchers in other disease states, and they were, almost as excited, if not more, than I was to hear about this because they've encountered this in their careers as well, with it being a barrier to patients. And then, specifically to the patients themselves, start having that conversation. It may not be that you need to be in a clinical trial at this point, but be a knowledge sink. Every patient, in my opinion, I tell them an educated patient is a good patient, and they tend to do better overall because they understand things, they know what options are out there. but then they also can become an advocate for the person down the street who needs help when they get diagnosed. And this really is something that's going to have a really positive impact on clinical trials and chronic diseases, and just spread the word.
Yeah. Tricia, what would you say? What takeaways would you like?
Absolutely. I agree with spread the word, and to give you very concrete ways to do that, please share out with your own HR that this is something that is now available to patients. Get the word right in their hands. The letter is on our website. Hand it to them. Say this is now an extended right. They should know about that, right? Another concrete way to do that is to reach out to your doctors. Bring it along to your doctors. As Dr. James said, all these doctors that are out there, they're trying to do things to make their patients better every single day. They'll be excited to know that this is a new way that they can support a patient. So get that in front of them so that they can think about that, whether that's for you or it's for others, right? Share your story out. We're looking for those that are participating in clinical trials to share their patient stories. This is so important. And if you have ever used FMLA, or if you use FMLA now that you know about this, in this way, help us get the story out that way too, because this will be absolutely critical for us to penetrate all the different information and noise that's out there in the world right now. We can't compete with TikTok too easily in this world, right? And then,
Hard.
if you're an employer, this is a great opportunity for you. Join the Champions for Change. Give your employees a paid day off for participating in clinical trials. Uh, Look at the FMLA and make sure that your HR understands how they would use that. And then finally, join the movement. We have a fantastic working group coalition that, as you can hear, has made significant strides in just the year since it's been formed, in really driving this change forward. And if you want to be a part of that kind of change, that down the road can change science for everyone, which will lead to better health for all of us, join us. We'd love to have you.
Outstanding. Well, Dr. James and Tricia, thank you for sharing your expertise, your experiences, obviously your passion for this work. 40 trips to the hill, Tricia. That's I don't know how you got. I mean, if the average person wanted to make one trip to the hill, that would be a big deal in their life, and here you've been 40 times. This is a really strong and powerful conversation, and I'm hoping that the listeners will take away not only the importance of clinical trial participation, but also some of the ways that we can make it accessible for everyone. And then I just want to say that to everyone who's supported Ignore No More from the very beginning, thank you for that. This win is yours as much as it is ours collectively. We've seen how focusing on communities most impacted, and Tricia, you mentioned the Black community, which is where this is happening. Those folks were saying, I can't participate, I'll get fired from my job. And we've already talked about why that cannot happen. And so this is really just the beginning. So let's continue to follow the work of FSR, the Coalition to Transform Clinical Trial Engagement. Jump in wherever you can, because together I believe that we can continue to make progress. And by the way, folks, if you haven't already checked out episode 1 to kind of hear how we got to this conversation today, please go back and do that. I'll make it easy for you by putting a link in the show notes. But that'll be the episode right before this one. We'll be talking about how it's changing the game for everybody, patients, employers, and the future of research. So, Tricia and Dr. James, again, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
John.
John.